my name is Barbara Dobrowolski, and I represent the Ontario English Catholic Teachers Association. Thank you for allowing me to speak with you today. I'm here representing the 45,000 professionals who teach kindergarten through to grade 12 in publicly funded Catholic schools across Ontario. Around Ontario, people are finally talking about a return to normalcy, a chance to go back to the way things were. As we consider the way forward, our message to the government is simple. Do not go back to your normal. Far too often, since coming to office in 2018, the government's agenda has been guided by ideology rather than evidence. Policy decisions have been made with little thought, foresight, or genuine consultation with stakeholders and experts, the consequences of which have been to destabilize public services. Enough's enough. Teachers want nothing more than to do the job they love in a productive and safe learning environment. But to be at their best, they need support. Specifically, they need a government that respects their judgment, that puts in place the necessary investments and resources that students need in order to recover and thrive. I don't want to dwell today on the many misleading statements that government officials offer in public, like when they claim to be making historic investments in education while conveniently ignoring that funding does not keep up with inflation. I do not want to dwell on the government's tendency to pursue legislation that is ultimately deemed by the courts to be unconstitutional, like Bill 124, or the shameful assault on workers' rights through Bill 28 legislation that targeted some of our lowest paid, predominantly women workers in the education sector and attempted to take away their constitutional rights. Instead, I want to focus my comments today on one thing in particular, what students need in order to recover from the pandemic and to thrive. Ask any educator in the province of Ontario why they do what they do, and you'll inevitably get the same response. It's about the students. I hope all of us here today agree that every student in Ontario deserves the opportunity to realize their full potential. So what does a real learning and recovery look like? Above all, it requires proper government investments directed towards the classroom for mental health and well-being supports, more professional services, and smaller class sizes so that students get individual support they deserve. Despite the best efforts of educators, the COVID-19 pandemic magnified and exacerbated issues of student mental health and well-being and negatively impacted student learning. This is especially true for our equity-deserving students from vulnerable communities, including students with special education needs, those with social and mental health concerns, and English as second language learners. As part of our No More Public campaign, we've spoken to parents across Ontario. Some of them told us that their children have been on a mental health services wait list for more than 3 years. This is simply unacceptable for a province as wealthy as Ontario. And while the government continues to claim that they're providing more supports and more professional services, my members, Catholic teachers, have one question. Where are they? The fact is, whether a student needs special education supports, extra assistance with literacy or math, or resources to address behavioral issues, their school should have resources to provide the needed support in a timely manner. This is made all the more critical given the rising number of violent incidents that we're seeing in society broadly and in schools. If we're going to address this issue at its root, we need a comprehensive and multifaceted approach, which ranges from providing students with the supports they need through to fulfilling the requirement to report incidents so that we can monitor the situation over time. We do a disservice to everyone if we do not take proactive measures to address this. Closely linked to promoting a safe and supportive learning environment is the issue of class size, and you've heard our association many times on this topic. There's a mountain of research on the benefits students enjoy from smaller class sizes, such as increased peer engagement and more one-on-one interaction with teachers, which improves their success. A real learning recovery demands a commitment from the government to lowering class size averages in elementary and secondary schools. It also requires students to be in class learning from their teachers. Schools are more than just desks. They are a community, a source of identity and opportunity for socialization. And research tells us that in-person learning is ideal and the most equitable learning model for students. And yet the government is pushing for more online learning, which quite frankly is absurd. The pandemic confirmed what teachers already knew, that online learning fails the overwhelming majority of students. It decreases interaction, it widens learning gaps, and it increases inequalities. Teachers don't like it, students don't like it, parents don't like it. So we must ask who benefits, other than companies that are attempting to profit from privatization. In the end, governing is about making choices, and so my members, 45,000 Catholic teachers, are imploring the government to make a different choice, to establish a new normal. If the government is serious about addressing pandemic-related learning loss and the mental health and well-being of students and educators, it must properly invest in a real plan that provides the necessary in-class resources and supports to ensure every student gets the learning environment they need and deserve. Ontario's frontline teachers and education workers have shown time and again that they know what's best for students to succeed. It's past time the government listened, as our schools work best when the government listens to and respects educators' experience and expertise. As the 2023-24 budget is developed, my members are calling on the government to immediately and significantly enhance mental health services in schools, expand school-based resources, supports and services, invest in lowering class size averages in elementary and secondary schools, cease the expansion of online learning and any efforts to privatize publicly funded education, commit to engage in meaningful collaboration with frontline educators and their representatives, especially as to how we can address the growing epidemic of violence in our schools.
Thank you very much.
With Barb from the Ontario English Catholic Teachers Association, you did mention in your comments that the government has been misleading the public about education and education spending, and it's a strong statement, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity to unpack that a bit.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Yes, it's true that the government rhetoric doesn't always reflect reality. And that's seen in both how much money the government invests. For example, when they speak of historic investments, they are conveniently ignoring the reality of inflation. And so in the end, what's happening is that there's significant underfunding both in the medium and in the long term. As my colleague stated, the FAO projects that the government is going to be underfunding education by $6 billion in the next 6 years. And that's that would have $6 billion would have just maintained the status quo. And we're in a point where we are really needing to invest for the learning recovery. There's also a disconnect in terms of how the government invests its money. So money is being siphoned off of education and funneled out of the classroom into what we're calling boutique initiatives. For example, these initiatives aren't doing anything to improve learning conditions. So for example, the tax credits and vouchers that we saw during the pandemic, or the tutoring payments to parents. And then they get bundled into the education budget, making it seem inflated when really it's been taken out.
Yeah.
The government's talking about reining in spending. Well, in fact, we know that the FAO is actually predicting small surpluses in the next through to 2028. So we really feel that those monies should be reinvested into public services like education. These are the services that Ontarians rely on. And really, we don't appreciate these accounting tricks or shell games. That what we really need is real investments and real actions.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I mean, there is a huge lack of transparency. I mean, and it was a week ago when the FAO did reveal the amount of underspending every year in education. And now the government will come back and say, well, that's just a snapshot in time. But when it's a pattern, it's not a snapshot. It's where you put the money demonstrates where your real priorities and values are.
Barb, I have to say, this is a very, you've great data, compelling. I also heard a little bit, with all due respect, of frustration in your voice. And I think that's because, again, you and your members are working really, really hard to provide the best education you can for your students with the limited resources, and we've talked about that in terms of the investments here. Could you talk a little bit about how you're feeling about the profession and how you're feeling about what your members are feeling in terms of how they can really make an impact, which is what we know that they want to do?
Yeah, well, I think that there have been some studies done by the Canadian Teachers Federation, for example, and that indicated that 70% of teachers are really worried for their own mental health and well-being. And the studies also showed that 75% are feeling like they're really not able to keep up with their own personal and professional expectations. And that is, it's very difficult when you are there for the students that you don't feel that you're getting around to all of them and doing what they need to really thrive and succeed in. So I think that the working conditions are getting difficult, especially with the vocational teacher shortage that was mentioned. I understand that almost on a daily basis, teachers are not being replaced in certain jurisdictions, like in London, for example. And teachers they don't have their prep and planning time. They're giving it up, which means that they have to prepare for their classes, over and above all of the extracurriculars after hours. It becomes very difficult, and our members are parents as well, have family obligations as well. Trying to manage all that, it's very, very difficult. So really we want to do what's best for students, and it's becoming trying.
Thank you. And I think, again, we all know that some of society's problems are getting more complex, right? And that a lot of those do show up in schools where kids are spending their days. So again, I want to thank all of you who work with kids to make sure that they're getting the best education they can. And I hope you stick with it.